Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. My guest today is Vladimir Yakunin, who is a longtime associate of Vladimir Putin. He spent 10 years at the helm of the Russian railways from 2005 until 2015. He's now the chair of the Dialogue of Civilizations Research Institute. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I want to begin with the situation in Syria. A couple of days ago, we saw the Russian President Vladimir Putin go to Syria. He announced, once more, I should say, the withdrawal of Russian troops. This image really seemed like a victory lap, that essentially Russia had won the war in Syria and sent a strong message to the Middle East and to the West that it was, again, a world power. Is this the way you saw this?
Not exactly. Of course, from the point of view of the actual situation in Syria and visit of the President of Russian Federation there, of course, someone can guess it is victorious trip. But, you know, it was not about victory as just a kind of the end of the battle with terrorism. And President Putin clearly declared, you know, yes, that is the end here, but we should be very cautious and we should be aware of terrorism. And that's why we need, you know, to collaborate and to cooperate. On the other side, you know, the Western coalition did a lot in, say, Iraq at the same time. And it is a pity that two sides could not collaborate fully, because when, you know, those two major powers, they were not in agreement, no. The third party, terrorists, they were gaining some kind of effects.
The problem, of course, is Bashar alAsad. Russia, probably with Iran, saved him, let's put it this way. For the West, they've said for years that he needs to go. Do you think that even though they do not acknowledge it publicly, Western leaders, starting with the American President Donald Trump, have now accepted the fact that Bashar al-Assad won the war and that he's here to stay at least for a while?
Listen, I'm not that big expert in the Arab or, you know, that's the type of the policy of the United States of America, needless to say about Mr. Trump, who gives a lot of considerations, you know, or evoking a lot of considerations concerning his policy. But on the other hand, I suppose, you know, it is not absolutely correct to assume that the major problem was Mr. Assad.
For the West, it was, clearly.
You know, from all the points of view, we need to accept that, you know, this gentleman was elected leader of the country. And you know the position, this is long-standing position, and as chairman of Dialogue of Civilization, I completely agree with this position. It is not for the, you know, outside forces to decide instead of the people who should be the leader of the country.
But we know elections in Syria are not really elections. You know this as well.
Listen, that is one way to say, and the other way is asking, you know, for example, why they are not that, you know, firmly done. Because of the situation, because of the terrorist group, because of ISIS.
Or because of the nature of the regime, maybe.
You know, maybe, but it is complex aspect. But for sure, we need to say this is not problem of just one person. This is the problem of terrorism, and that is the problem. What is the major, what we are fighting? We are fighting to, you know, comfort ourselves. If we are so strong that we could change regime, or we could, you know, battle over there. Or we are fighting to unite the world against this, you know, very, very dangerous terrorist attacks, which we are all suffering from.
Is it for Russia maybe a revenge, quote unquote, for what happened in Libya several years ago, when Russia feels that it was maybe a little bit too naive in terms of what the West was up to?
It is difficult to answer this question. Those who made the decision, they can answer whether it was naive or not. To my humble opinion, what happened in Libya just proved that if there is no deep understanding of the situation, when, you know, we're accepting some international decisions, finally, we can find that the entire world is in tension because of what is going on in this particular country nowadays.
I want to get to the relationship with the US. Obviously, Russia is in the news every day in the US for meddling during the election, the hacking of emails, and collusion accusations. With the Trump administration, there's now a very serious investigation going on. What's your take on what's happening in this?
The first results of this investigation proved not the linkage of the particular personalities with Russia, but with Ukraine. So this is absolutely different.
No, there are some ties that are being investigated with Russia. You know this.
Let them.
You deny? You think it's all propaganda or lies, or like the president of Russia said?
May I say the following? I'm not a president, so excuse me.
But you know
it is my personal opinion. You know, to the best of my knowledge, I cannot accept that, you know, the entire nation could be manipulated with just one source of some information. It is not possible. I don't trust it. Of course, every country is interested in attempt to influence their neighbors, to produce better image, to, you know, to support better understanding between countries. But I don't trust that, you know, the way it is being presented, that Russia possesses such evil force to manipulate the entire American nation, I just don't trust it. Excuse me.
I understand, but that's still being investigated. What about the ties between Donald Trump and Russia and Donald Trump's entourage with Russia? Some people have resigned because of that. It seems quite serious.
Listen, I don't know exactly the facts which could compromise Mr. Trump in his linkage to Russia. But Trump was a businessman. He was working globally. To my mind, he had an attempt to construct some Trump Tower even in Moscow. He failed. You know, maybe fortunately for him, maybe unfortunately. But, you know, he was not even a politician. So, you know, it should be judged by the fact of his occupation at that time. That's it.
So you think it's just propaganda against Russia?
Well, I suppose it is, say, too much of the propaganda there.
Right. What about sanctions? I mean, you yourself are under U.S. sanctions for the invasion of Crimea back in 2014. There are also EU sanctions that were just prolonged, actually, for 6 months because of that invasion and because of Moscow's alleged role in eastern Ukraine. Do you think this is having an effect?
Listen, I suppose today I read in the small script of some information that, you know, the research institute in Kiel in Germany is ready to issue some research. According to this research, the major burden of sanctions in Europe was placed on the shoulders of Germans. 40% of the losses bearing a German industry, German economy. France and Great Britain, you know, just, you know, like 4.5%. United States, 0.6. So, yes, you know, sanctions, they have impact. Firstly...
But not on Russia, that's what you're saying?
It is not only on Russia. It has impact on entire Europe, Russia included, directed against Russia. That is correct. But the impact is very painful for entire Europe also.
And so you obviously think they should be lifted, obviously against you, but against Russia in general.
Listen, I am sanctioned, you know, as they said, because of Crimea situation. I never had anything to deal with this decision, or, you know, invasion itself, or, you know, adoption of self, whatever term you use. So I was sanctioned for what? For the fact that I was rather visible figure in Russia because I was
close to Vladimir Putin.
I was close to the government. I was close to the administration due to the fact that the company has 1.2 million employees, and this is not possible not to be close. But, you know, I sanctioned for what? For relations. Not related to Crimea, not related to anything else, but to relations. That's it.
Right. I want to get quickly to Vladimir Putin. He recently announced that he would run again for re-election. The presidential election is now scheduled for March the 18th. Most observers are saying it's not actually an election because everything is being done so Vladimir Putin is re-elected without a real rival. One of his potential rival, Alexei Navalny, is prevented essentially from running because of his accusations of corruption. He actually targeted you at some point. Do you think there will indeed be a real election in Russia, or it's just a show?
Okay, firstly, speaking about myself, never, ever any proof of his accusation were delivered to court and accepted. So forget about that. Secondly, you are flattering this gentleman very much to name his actual rivalry to President of Russian Federation, Mr. Putin.
So
the scales are so different, and that was clearly pronounced yesterday when Mrs. Sobchak asked the question directed to President Putin. And thirdly, listen, this is a process. We consider this democratic process. The fact that we do not have person scale of Mr. Putin does not prevent the fact that in Russia there are opposition leaders, leaders of the parties, who are fighting, against him in order to obtain their position in this hierarchy. But if the person cannot get the support, that is his fate. That is his inability.
So you're saying Vladimir Putin is not doing everything to prevent any real opposition, because that's the feeling people have. He is really trying to make sure he wins without taking any risks.
Listen, I met many leaders in the world, and it is my humble opinion that the normal people, after some period in power, the most valuable thing they are dreaming, to be freed from this position, to become free personality again.
So you think that's what he is thinking?
I'm thinking that, for Mr. Putin, this is service. That is not kind of game or enjoyment.
Okay, Vladimir Yakunin, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for watching this interview here on France 24.